Today, students can search for answers in seconds, watching lessons on glowing screens and accessing knowledge from anywhere in the world. But in 1900 America, one teacher changed a student's life not with technology, but with belief, patience, and a single moment that no one else thought mattered. In the autumn of 1900, in a small rural town in Kansas, a one-room wooden schoolhouse stood alone beside a dusty road. The building was simple, just a single space with rough wooden desks, a blackboard at the front, and a small stove in the corner to fight the cold mornings. Inside that classroom, children of all ages sat together, learning side by side, and at the front stood a teacher named Miss Eleanor Whitfield. She was in her early 30s, known throughout the town for her quiet strength and dedication. Teaching in those days was not easy. Resources were limited, books were scarce, and many children attended school only when they were not needed at home or in the fields. Yet Miss Whitfield believed something deeply. Every child mattered. Among her students was a 12-year-old boy named James Carter. James was different from the others. He often arrived late, his clothes worn and dusty. His hands were rough from helping his father on their small farm before sunrise. While other children read aloud confidently, James struggled. He stumbled over words, hesitated when writing, and avoided raising his hand. Many assumed he was simply not as capable. Some students laughed quietly when he made mistakes. Even a few parents in the community had already decided his future. He would grow up to work the land, just like his father, and nothing more. But Miss Whitfield saw something they didn't. She saw potential hidden beneath hesitation. One cold morning in early November, as frost covered the windows and the children huddled closer to the stove, Miss Whitfield asked each student to read a passage from a worn book. When it was James's turn, the room grew quiet. He stood slowly, holding the book with trembling hands. The words blurred before his eyes. He tried to read, but the letters seemed to shift, refusing to stay still. His voice faltered. A few students began to whisper. James stopped. Silence filled the room. In that moment, something small but powerful happened. Miss Whitfield did not correct him. She did not move on to the next student. Instead, she walked slowly toward him, placed her hand gently on the page, and said something no one expected. "Take your time," she said softly. "I know you can do this." Those words changed everything. For the first time, someone believed in him, not just as he was, but as he could become. After class that day, Miss Whitfield asked James to stay behind. Instead of pointing out his mistakes, she asked him questions. "What do you see when you look at these words?" she asked. James hesitated before answering. "They move," he admitted quietly. "Sometimes I can't keep them still." Miss Whitfield paused. She had seen something like this before. Though the term was not widely known at the time, James showed signs of what we now understand as a learning difficulty, something that made reading harder for him than for others. But instead of labeling him as incapable, she chose a different path. She began teaching him differently. Each afternoon, after the other students left, James stayed behind. Miss Whitfield used simple methods, tracing letters in sand, reading aloud slowly, breaking words into smaller parts. She turned learning into something he could see, touch, and understand. Progress was slow, but it was real. Weeks turned into months. By the spring of 1901, James was no longer the boy who avoided reading. He still struggled, but he no longer feared it. More importantly, he began to believe in himself. America at the turn of the 20th century was changing rapidly. Education was becoming more important, but systems were still developing. Many children who struggled in school were simply left behind. But not James, because one teacher refused to give up on him. Years passed. James continued his education, carrying with him the lessons he had learned, not just from books, but from belief. By the time he reached his late teens, he had developed a strong interest in mechanics. He understood how things worked, how parts fit together, how problems could be solved through patience and observation. skills he had unknowingly developed while learning to read. With determination, he found work in a small workshop, eventually building a reputation for his problem-solving abilities. By the 1910s, James Carter had become known as a skilled engineer, someone who could fix complex machinery that others struggled to understand. People admired his talent, but few knew the story behind it. Years later, after achieving success, James returned to the small town where everything had begun. The schoolhouse still stood, though older and quieter than before. Miss Whitfield was no longer teaching. Time had moved on, but her impact had not. James walked slowly to the front of the classroom, now empty, and placed a small object on the teacher's desk, a carefully crafted mechanical tool he had designed himself, a symbol of what belief can build. On a piece of paper, he wrote a simple message: "You were right." Today, education is more advanced than ever. Students have access to tools, technology, and resources that were unimaginable in 1900. But one truth remains unchanged. Sometimes, the most powerful thing a teacher can give a student is not knowledge, it is belief. Because more than a century ago, in a small wooden schoolhouse in Kansas, one teacher proved something extraordinary. A single moment of patience, a few words of encouragement, can change the direction of a life forever.